Wildcard, Liverpool apparently won the Premier League thing. Like, that's what they did.
Yeah, so I've heard.
Yeah, so that's cool for them. We will open it up to obviously our flying Kiwis and Kiwi footballers, but obviously you're a hearty Premier League fan. We've no doubt got Premier League fans across Aotearoa as well. And the reason I'm interested in Liverpool winning the Premier League is the Klopp factor. And as a coach myself and someone who looks into a lot team culture and, you know, how teams are built, how teams are led and all that stuff, Klopp is a fascinating case study. And there's a Kiwi factor here as well, because a lot of the methods or just little changes, tweaks and ideas in building a better culture at Liverpool. One way you could say in building Liverpool into a Premier League champion, but I think that all comes back to the culture within the club. So it's not necessarily about building a Premier League champion, it's about building the club that Klopp wants to lead and be a part of, and all these people at Liverpool want to be a part of. And I think a lot of the little things he implemented stem a lot from the All Blacks and their team culture and how they go about their business and who they are as people. And just hearing little stories. I shout out to Poet and Vuj, who do a lot of great football content on YouTube, so check them out if you're looking for a lot of the English content and it delivered in a very cool way. Just hearing some of the stuff that Klopp has done in reshaping the culture around Liverpool, so like ensuring that players, you know, are eating at the club and ensuring that everyone knows the staff members' names, ensuring stuff like, you know, we always hear about the All Blacks unloading their own luggage. We always hear about the All Blacks cleaning up their own changing room, and basically everyone is involved in leading by example. Everyone is involved in building the club that they all want to be a part of and building the team and the whānau and that they want to be a part of. And I think a lot of that stuff has been led by Klopp at Liverpool. So maybe you can, if you do want to, you can go into like tactical stuff as far as how Liverpool won the Premier League tactically and on the field. But as a footballer, as a footballing person yourself, how do you view Klopp as someone who shaped and molded this Liverpool team, but more importantly, Liverpool the club, into who they are now? Because I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's actually directly correlated. Putting so much effort into the culture within Liverpool Football Club has led to great success. Like, obviously they won the Champions League as well. So it's not just like Klopp comes in, he's a good coach. No, it's Klopp comes in and he completely reshapes the culture, the feeling, the vibe, and the atmosphere at Liverpool, and that results in success.
Yeah, like he is the guy of all the managers really, who leads by example in a way beyond what even any of the other top managers will do. Like, I mean, Pep Guardiola his fingertips are his fingerprints are absolutely all over that Manchester City team, just as they were his Bayern Munich team and his Barcelona teams before that. Like, he's a very, very, very hands-on manager, and he's got extreme like top tier just tactical ideas that he implements, and ideas that, by the way, I don't know if he gets enough credit for how well he's evolved them over time. Like, this Man City team don't play the way that Barcelona did 10 years ago. There's certainly many similarities. It's still distinctively Pep Guardiola's team, but he has adapted to the different times and the different leagues he's played in. But he just he's one of those managers who sort of sets the wheels in motion and then watches them go, whereas Jurgen Klopp just, more than anything, he is also like a tactical innovator. I mean, and he's also a guy who's got that same thing about adapting to different places and teams and whatever, because when he was at Dortmund, it was, the gegenpressing, and when he first came to England, that was what everyone expected to see, was this really high power, like big energy pressing, like really early on in other teams' possessions, just absolutely like throw guys forward. You got midfielders pushing out and boxing them in and just causing chaos and trying to win the ball as high up the field as they can, and then counter-attacking quickly while the team's rattled at the back there. Not really the way we've seen Liverpool play, though, and he's been there a few years now, and he's sort of adapted as it goes. You still see very high energy, quick pace play of the way they play, but they're not a team that plays out of possession like that. They're I don't know, they're a team that just flows forward so naturally, so relentlessly. They're so overwhelming like that, and a lot of it is just that front three that they've got with Mane, Firmino, and old Mo Salah, of which, to me, it seems Sadio Mane has been comfortably I know Salah has been a superstar for the last few years, but Sadio Mane seems to have been the most impressive of them all, to me at least, this season. But just the fact that they've got this, and also you got dudes pushing through from midfield and whatever, and you got their two outstanding fullbacks, both young British dudes as well, Andy Robertson on the left and Trent Alexander-Arnold on the right, and a very good goalkeeper which was one of the reason they didn't win the European Cup. Well, it wasn't the only reason, but it was the obvious reason when they had old Karius in goal a couple of years ago, come back with Alisson there and then win it themselves. Because that's the other factor to remember, is they're also defending European champions. They won't be in a couple months because they have already been knocked out of the season's Champions League. But I think they'll take that Champions League 1 year and a 30-year Premier League drought the next. I think they're pretty happy with that in Liverpool. But yeah, like Klopp has evolved the style of play a little bit, but just the key factors of how they play. It's not like you look at this title-winning team and you're going to be writing down ideas. I mean, there are certainly things you could write down about like the tactical innovations and the style of play that they have and and all that. But I think the defining factor has just been that it's almost like a relentless positivity about them. And teams turn up expecting to lose because of this, because they know Liverpool are just going to keep coming at them for 90 minutes, making them run and run and run, and you just like. No one's really been able to withstand, and there have been a lot of games where it's very frustrating when you're someone like me cheering against Liverpool, desperately not wanting to see Liverpool win this title, and you see teams where it's like, if you just didn't give them as much respect as you do, this wouldn't be the case. But then I say that as a Manchester United fan who benefited from a very thick veil of illusion in the same way for many years, where teams just sort of expected United to score that late winner or whatever, and it just shows that times they come and they go in little cycles, and it's you're up one day and the next you're down and all that. But yeah, it's because that, what did I call it? Relentless positivity, like that sort of overwhelming nature of Liverpool. That comes from Klopp, and it doesn't come from Klopp telling them how to play. Obviously, that's how it's implemented. There's bits of that, but the origin point is just Jurgen Klopp on the sideline, always smiling, and when he's not smiling, it's because the game, like the ball's in play, and he's living every single kick, and out there screaming and trying to wind everyone up, and he's just like this emotional kind of like a lightning rod, but like a I don't know, like the opposite of the lightning rod, like an emotional beacon, like he's sending it out to it, and it's just so contagious. And then you get him in the press conferences, and he's really well spoken. He's always polite and smiling, and he just seems like a nice dude, and everyone likes him. And it's something that's really kind of like filtered throughout this Liverpool squad. You look at what it was like before he was there, where they had a lot of very good players. They maybe didn't have a complete squad, so there's another footballing aspect there of how well he's filled out the squad and making the right signings, bringing the right players through the academy and stuff like that, and giving them opportunities to get better and improve rather than just throwing them in the deep end and saying they're not good enough kind of thing, as you see at many other clubs. And it just seems like there's such a force of will and a force of passion around Jurgen Klopp, which has got Liverpool to where they are now, and more than any other manager in the current moment, he just seems to be a guy who emotionally feels the feels the successes of his team and all that, and fair play to him. He's done what he's lived up to and then beyond. Like, he's reached and then gone beyond all of the expectations anyone could have had for him when he took over. It's hard to, I mean, people are going to forget this now when Klopp was at Dortmund, and even a few years into his Liverpool reign when he hadn't won a major trophy or whatever, and there was this reputation with him that he was the kind of manager who he'd get you into the final, but he wouldn't necessarily get you to the trophy. Like, a lot of that is just because he managed in Germany against Bayern Munich a lot, so there's a lot of cup finals you lose there. There's a lot of runners-up in the Bundesliga. He did win the Bundesliga once. There's also a Champions League final where they also ran into Bayern Munich, so guts, mate. But he's sort of come back around to his success now with Liverpool, and you can't you can't hold it against him. There's a lot of reasons for which I would like to hold it against Liverpool, but I can't really. Sort of just got to bow down and say the best team has won, and it wasn't even close. And what Klopp has achieved and what those players have achieved there is just kind of outstanding, and fair play, I guess. Fair play to them.
Have you got any anecdotes of stuff you've heard Klopp doing, or Klopp things Klopp has implemented at Liverpool? Like, just on your travels, have you heard little anecdotes, little stories about something Klopp has changed or something that he's brought in that might just be a cool yarn?
I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but there's certainly the wide-ranging thing, which I think is easy to ignore, but he's that dude who, whenever a player is subbed off, whether they've played well or played poorly, he's like the first one to put an arm around them kind of thing. And I think someone like, let's throw old Jose Mourinho in here, someone who has a very a different aspect of how he wants to manage a team. He's quite demanding of his players and things like this, and he asks them to rise to challenges, and he provides a lot of those challenges himself. And he's fallen out with players because of that. You just think of the disaster that it was when he left Chelsea a few years back. And that's compared to what Jurgen Klopp does. It's a very interesting contrast, because Klopp is always supportive, always I'm sure behind closed doors he'll rip into fellas when they need them, but he doesn't ever throw his dudes under the bus in the way that Mourinho has. I think Mourinho's been frustrated by I don't know, a lot of I don't know exactly where to go with this point that I want to make, but a lot of the reason you hear from British pundits is just maybe Mourinho just can't relate to the new generation in the same way. And then at the same time, I'm like, well, I don't know if that new generation idea that younger people now are just softer and need to be cuddled a bit more, I don't know if that's at all, I'm sure, because the thing about that is you get, the pundits who are saying that kind of thing are also 45, 50-year-old ex-players who also can't relate to young people, and so there's a fair bit of projection going on there. I don't know that that's actually, I think all those times when people are like, oh, this generation is this, it's always a completely stupid thing to say, because how are you going to judge every single person of a certain age, with regardless of background and everything? How are you going to judge them all together? It's dumb. It's immensely stupid. But Klopp Klopp undeniably has a friendlier tone with his players, and I think maybe there is more of a players don't want to put up with the bullshit so much now, when you can see there is more player power in sports, and it isn't you can force a transfer if you need one, if you're not in the right position, and players have lines of access to be your best mate you might play for Liverpool, your best mate might play for Chelsea or something like that, because you came up playing England youth grades together or something like that. There's there is a sort of aspect to all that, and I think Klopp just I don't know if I'm going to say he is a what would you call it, just the perfect mold of a modern manager, the way he does these things, but his success means he's going to be the most influential of it. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of bleeds in, because I mean, the easy thing to say now for me to like stick a final knife in would be to say like the age of a Jose Mourinho type manager is gone. But I think that age entered 5 years ago anyway, and he just doesn't realize it, and a lot of other people don't realize it. But maybe he'll do well at Spurs, who knows? But certainly Jurgen Klopp's going to be like in the same way that when Pep Guardiola was winning everything with Barcelona, everyone's then wanted to be like the teams that could hold 75% of possession and build up play with these perfect little passing moves, lots of short passing and movement and stuff like that. Now everyone is going to want to do what Liverpool are doing with Jurgen Klopp. So, again, it's the same thing people had with Barcelona. It's unattainable to actually try that, so it ends up going into something else. And I think Klopp is probably a manager who also, in his own way, learns a lot from those early Guardiola teams. But which is interesting then for him to be in a situation where Guardiola's been his main title rival for the last couple of years. But both are very different to what they were back then.
I'd add to that, Wildcard. So you're alluding to emulating the Barcelona style of football under Pep Guardiola and trying to catch up to like stylistic, tactical direction of football elements. But if you're trying to emulate or replicate Klopp and how Liverpool play football, you're going to have to do a lot more than football, because you're going to need a manager who has extreme amounts of positivity. It's more of a complete package. Like, it's not just, we're going to take that style of football. Or how are you going to go about, getting the players on board with that? How are you going to go about creating an environment where players are willing to do absolutely anything and everything? How are you going to go about creating an environment where all the players enjoy each other's company? Those are, I think, are actually far more instrumental in building a successful club as opposed to style of football. And it's just something that you can't even try to replicate unless you're going all in. You're not going to get a coach like Klopp, but if you are going to replicate this stuff, you're going to have to take a more holistic approach to building your football club, because that's what Klopp has done. It's not just changing how we play football. No, it's about completely reshaping the club. And another interesting thought was how, Dortmund was a very working class kind of club in Germany. They weren't the massive Bayern Munich, strong supporter base who just wanted, they were just so engaged in their team and their club and the effort and the energy of the club. And Liverpool's a similar situation. They're not necessarily the biggest club in England, but they got a very hearty fan base who are very engaged, very community-orientated, community-focused. And Klopp has channeled that. He's channeled the fact that you need to know everyone's name working here. You need to know the lunch lady's name. You need to use your manners. You need to, that is a very community-orientated way of building a club as well. So it's very interesting because, I imagine some teams are looking stylistically and we need to play how Liverpool are playing. But that, and then bringing it out to a wider sports context, I think there's a lot of examples. You might look at the Roosters in the NRL, where other NRL teams might look at them and be we need to play that way. Or you might look at the Melbourne Storm and think, we need to play the Melbourne Storm way. But there's so much more to it. It's, the Melbourne Storm, famous for their culture, famous for how they go about their business. So if you're going to do the Melbourne Storm way, well, any new player to the club, any rookie or any player coming in has to work a full week of full-time employment during off-season training, because that's the Melbourne Storm way. So it's and I think a lot of these clubs, they look at it and they're I want to be that club. I want to be like them. We're going to play like them. We're going to copy, a couple of their players. We're going to look to emulate their style of whatever sport. We're going to be like them. But they don't bother to actually invest in the areas of investment that those clubs have made to put them in this position. It's they're only looking at the surface. They're not even looking at the factors that lead up to the on-field performance, let alone trying to understand it and really put energy towards it and even come up with their own way of doing it. So I think there's around the world in different sports leagues, and Liverpool is a fantastic example of this. You've got a team that is ticking all their boxes holistically, and everyone else is trying to catch up, but they're doing so in a very lazy, kind of unenlightened fashion, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, I do, because, and it's an interesting point as well about the comparisons between Dortmund and Liverpool, because I think, like, Klopp had done enough to where he mostly had his pick to what club he wanted to go to after he'd left Dortmund, and he took a little bit of time off, and I think it was very deliberate why he chose Liverpool. I think there are other clubs who maybe would have, I don't want to say maybe would have offered him more money. Like Liverpool are a powerhouse club. They've got one of the biggest fan bases on the planet. They might not be like Man City, PSG kind of rich, but they're more than holding their own. They're all right. But yeah, I think there was probably quite a deliberate thing that he saw those connections even ahead of time, and he had sort of an idea that this was the time. And he's a little bit of a romantic too, Jurgen Klopp, so he probably felt that like this was a club that was had the kind of history and legacy on and off the field that he wanted to be a part of, and also that there was this opportunity to put them back on a level which they hadn't been at for a couple decades, which they'd been sort of like, instead of being one of the, one or two best clubs in England like they were throughout the 80s, they'd spent a couple decades being like, they'd had a couple title runs, but not quite getting there. They won, obviously, the Istanbul Champions League final most famously, but like Steven Gerrard had an entire career and never won the Premier League, despite Liverpool being at least like in and around the top four the whole time. So you probably would have to say they underachieved a fair bit over that time, and this was a club which had that close potential to be able to get to that next level, and they just needed that extra something special, and I guess he was that. And it took a couple of years as well. It was always going to take a couple of years. You got to, when we talk about like that holistic outlook to the club, it takes time to do that. Like, and you need a little bit of faith, and you need some of those short-term results in order to justify staying on long enough to be able to see out the long-term vision and all that. Many examples of that not happening throughout all sports. When it comes to their influence, I think, you do need both. Like you do need that off-field, like high cultural type stuff. You also need to be tactically ahead of the game if you're going to be successful on this level. Like you need to have both of those things, but it doesn't. You can maybe make it work without the high cultural stuff, but you can't make it work for an extended amount of time. And there's a few good examples of that actually around the place, of like clubs that start incredibly and then wear and tear throughout the season, and then maybe they just don't have that extra shot in the arm that maybe a Jurgen Klopp is able to offer to his team, kind of thing, when they need it. Because to be honest, like the way they bounced back even from they had that draw against Everton coming out, but they'd had some rough results just leading into the lockdown. They'd had a couple stumbles. They'd been knocked out of the Champions League. I think they got knocked out of the FA Cup as well, and there was maybe just a little bit of waiting if they'd come out of, even though the title was surely all wrapped up, coming back was just a formality, but if they had like just 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 games where they weren't at their best and still hadn't secured the title, I think there would have been a lot of panic setting in. Not that it would have stopped them from getting there, but maybe it would have taken some of the shine off to where it became a relief rather than them getting there with like their last performance. There was they won 4-0 again because they won the title without having to play. It was City dropping points, but the game before that had basically sealed it when they won 4-0 against, I think, Crystal Palace. Nice and poetic there, because Crystal Palace obviously came from behind back in the Luis Suarez, Brendan Rodgers days, and that famous one snatched some points off Liverpool there, which kind of doomed their title race. It was I think the match after Steven Gerrard had the slip against Chelsea. So, famous days there, and nice little exorcism to get it done against Crystal Palace in such an emphatic way with some incredible goals. And that strike from Fabinho, man, that one's still heading. That one would still be heading upwards if it wasn't for the net getting in the way. So yeah, like I don't know, just to be able to do it nice and emphatically coming after that long break with that sort of pressure of expectation, just as another example of I think Klopp used a phrase like they're monsters of mentality or something like that, and they certainly have that like complete and utter belief in what they're doing and all those things, and it does stem from the manager. And I think if you tried to copy those kind of things, even if you tried to copy the complete holistic idea of a football club and the way that Klopp has set it up, copying doesn't really work. Because if you copy it, I already talked about evolution before. That's how it goes. Like, you got to continually stay ahead of the game, and it's one thing to get to the top. It's another thing to stay at the top. Like, by the time you have tried to set your team up to be like Liverpool 2.0, they've already gone on to be Liverpool 3.0, and you've been left behind once again. You're just in the same position you started off with. And that goes in a lot of different ways, like tactics constantly evolving, what it takes to, like, I mean, the top cultural side of things, all the off-field stuff, you can keep, like, baselines and you can keep ideas, and these things don't have to change, but the players around are going to be changing, and therefore you're going to have to stay on your toes to make sure that the new signing comes in and buys into all these ideals and all these kind of things. And no one gets like stroppy because they're not getting minutes and whatever, and it's just it's a constant balancing act to keep everything on a level playing field, and it's easier to do when you're winning a lot of games. But I mean, they also were on the same path before that. But yeah, it's I don't know. I think I already made that point, but it is an evolutionary thing. You got to stay on your toes throughout all this kind of stuff if you want to turn like one title into 2 or 3 or 4. I would include, like, with Liverpool, I'm already saying they're in this dynasty period because they've won a Champions League, they've won a Premier League. They will continue to be threatening for both those competitions over the next couple of years too, and I'm sure there's a few signings they're lining up just to keep things moving on the same trajectory, because you can't stand still. You gotta keep up with that evolution. And I get they've won the title earlier than any team has ever won the title before in the history of the English top division football, with 7 games to go. So they got plenty of time to start planning for next season already. I mean, they're in a pretty enviable place.
Radio Wildcard, just quickly, what flying Kiwis are top of your mind at the moment? We don't need the full debrief, just run us through a couple of individuals who are piquing your antennas at this juncture.
Well, I'll give you a twofer here. Joe Bell over the last week, because he's been playing for a club called Viking in top division Norway, his first professional stint out of college in the USA. Gone like straight into the first team picture, as was expected for a guy that club scouted nice and excessively throughout their time. Didn't give up when he said he wanted to go back and finish his that like last year in university and have a crack at a national title there. I think they ended up losing in the final. And then, like, they stuck around, signed him after that. He goes in, he does well in preseason. He scored a goal in one of their preseason games. First couple games, he's playing off the bench, getting a few minutes. Team's not getting the victories, though. So, third game of the season, he comes in to start. Fourth game of the season, he stays in there to start. He's getting good reviews from some of the media folks over in Norway about just how well he's doing. I cut a couple like highlights together just to give a bit of a glimpse of some of that stuff from that fourth game that he played. They still haven't won. They've got one. They drew one of these They drew that third game and they lost the fourth one. So it goes. But like, you know, Joe Bell himself is doing excellently. Hopefully, lead them to a few victories down the line. And then speaking of victories, we also had that Meikayla Moore at MSV Duisburg with their little relegation battle, trying to keep the Zebras in the top flight of the Women's Bundesliga in Germany. And coming into the last couple games, they knew they were going to have to win the last one. They did extremely well to hold the fourth place team in Germany to a 0-0 draw in the second to last game, which put them in the position where suddenly, like, there was a little bit of stuff outside their control, but because they had a much better goal difference, because they've got a good defense that's been able to not get thrashed and too many of these games. They knew that if they could win that last game, then they would 99% certain be safe, be able to stay up in the top flight. I think it's FC Cologne had to win by like 12 goals or something like that to overtake their goal difference. They did win, but they only won 1-0. But that did at least keep the pressure on Duisburg, so where they did have to win themselves. But they did. They came through with a 2-0 victory. Got the goods there, and then with Bayer Leverkusen also losing, it meant there was, for that last relegation spot, there were 3 teams all tied on 17 points, but Duisburg had the best goal difference, so they stayed up. Not only stayed up, but they stayed up with a position to spare thanks to all that. So, a happy ending to that whole battle. The twist in the tale for Meikayla Moore is that this was actually her final game for the club, because she announced on Instagram leading up to that it was the end of her 2-year contract, and she has decided to, pursue further challenges in her career. You'd sort of hope after 30-odd games across 2 years, which is would have been a lot more if it was not for her the Achilles injury that caused her to miss all the first half of this season as well. You'd hope that means she's done very well there, so hopefully that's like a step up, and go find a club that won't be battling for relegation next year, whether that's in Germany or beyond, who knows. But she should have plenty of interest from other clubs. It'll be pretty interesting to see where she lands and where she ends up after this. Certainly deserved a big old pay rise at a bigger club for her performances over the last couple of years, including for the football firms, where she's been one of the breakout players over the last probably 3 years as well. So good times. Another player who also, I couldn't help but think of her case when thinking about the 2023 World Cup being down in Australia and New Zealand, and someone like Meikayla Moore who missed the last World Cup. It was going to be her first World Cup, and she probably would have been a starting player, or at least would have been someone who was heavily involved in the match day squads and stuff, and didn't get to do it because she busted a Achilles tendon or something like that just in the days leading up to the World Cup, already in camp, already in France with the team, just in training just before the tournament. Pretty devastating, but then to come back at a time when in a couple of years' time she'll probably be in the peak of her career, and being able to do it in New Zealand as well is kind of a cool story, and hopefully she gets that big redemption down the line. But yeah, in the meantime, look, she's kept one club in the top flight of Germany for a couple of years, and now she's going to move on to do something hopefully bigger and better.
As she bloody well should.
Too right.